The Matric results are out, and with that comes celebration, panic, and a national scramble for university places that simply don't exist in the numbers we pretend they do. Every year, we tell young people to work hard, pass Matric, and doors will open. But the truth is more uncomfortable. There are not enough university spaces, not enough funding, and certainly not enough honest conversations about what happens next. At the same time, our economy is crying out for skills: engineers, artisans, health professionals, even teachers. And while thousands of capable young people are locked out by capacity, cost, or both, today's conversation cuts through the feel-good headlines and we ask harder questions about the system. I'm joined by two people who see this crisis from very different angles: an education activist and former teacher himself, and the director of the Foundation for Education and Social Justice, Mr. Hendrik Makaneta, who's worked inside the public system, and the head of a private tertiary institution group operating in the space where demand is exploding, Dr. Linda Meyer, the managing director of ADvTECH Independent Institute of Education. This isn't a debate about good versus evil. It's about whether our education pipeline is honest, fair, and fit for the country we're trying to build. That we've been talking, it's a week and a half after the results. When you look at these results, what do you think that they are a true reflection of what the schooling system is producing? What does it tell us, the story it tells?
Well, quite honestly, if we are to be honest as a country, the results do not necessarily give a true reflection of what has transpired within the system of education. Remember, the focus is on grade 12. And now these kids have been in the system for a period of 12 years. Some of them maybe 13. Depending on whether they failed a grade or not. Now, along the way, or let me start by saying when they started in grade 1, it was a particular number. They all started together as grade 1 learners. But 12 years later, when they wrote the final exams or the National Senior Certificate exams, that number had been reduced drastically because along the way, there are those who fell along the way, the dropout rate is there in the system. Some of them, of course, are still maybe in lower grades because they've not been able to pass consistently. So the results do not give a true reflection in that sense.
Linda, we often look at these Matric results and there's lots of celebration that goes with it on the one side, but honestly, how prepared are these learners when they come out with their bachelor passes to be in a university?
Well, the reality is we have more than a 50% dropout rate of first-year students. So
Sure.
The answer in that is, as much as the Minister of Basic Education is defending the low pass rates that are required for grade 12, the reality is we have to look at what happens to students when they leave the schooling framing. And as you rightfully point out, when they go into tertiary education, we need to ensure that they're equipped. So certainly most of the institutions, public and private, have bridging programs that we are forced to implement to ensure that students are able to cope in their first years of studies.
Sure. So is there something deeper that is masked with the kind of pass rates that we are seeing about the inequality in the system at basic education level?
Well, absolutely, but there's some pragmatic realities we need to face. So we have some 925,000 students that write grade 12. Of those, almost 600,000 are already social grant beneficiaries. So we know that they come from households that are really under distress. And we have to start investing and making sure that these students are supported adequately, because it is absolutely, disingenuous of us to think that a student studying at a Candle, and there are many that are very successful, are really geared and have the same advantages of students that don't. So what do we do to really ensure that these students, by the time they finish grade 12, that they are equipped then to move into tertiary study? The second thing is our public university sector can only take between 210 and 230,000 first-year students. Over 600,000 students qualify for tertiary education, We have 345,000 with bachelor's passes, but we tend to forget about the additional 150,000 that have diploma passes and about the same number for higher certificate passes. So really, this is a big challenge that we have as a government, but certainly as a nation, to ensure, because now as taxpayers, we've invested in the students' future. I've already pointed out the social grant households. As a taxpayer, you are taking them through the schooling system, and now what needs to happen to them? When we look at our youth unemployment rate, second highest in the world, just over 60%. But if you have a degree, it is between 10 and 12%. It vacillates, obviously, according to Stats SA's quarterly reporting. So we can see that investing in higher education is a no-brainer. We need to do it, and the country needs to grow and needs to have the skills in the market as we move forward.
Let's talk honestly about capacity within the schooling system. Is the problem of capacity and getting kids through the system and ready for university, is it a money problem? Is it funding? Is it a governance problem? Or is it a political problem? You know, what is it that's broken in the system in your experience as an activist?
I think that, the system, it's a wide range of issues. Of course, the system experiences inequality. You've got schools that are in suburbs, most of which are doing very well. And you also have schools in townships, some of which are doing well, but not necessarily every learner, There are overcrowded schools where you find that it becomes even more difficult for a teacher to, see these learners one-on-one. There are times when a teacher may need a one-on-one engagement with a learner. So in an overcrowded classroom, it's often difficult for the teacher to do that. As a result, some of the learners fall behind, with their studies because the teacher is not always readily available. Whereas in your suburban schools, you might find that the class has got fewer learners, and of course, the teacher can be able to attend to all of them. But these problems of learners not being able to make it in the system, affects both rich schools or your quintile 5 and quintile 1, because there are other problems, underlying problems which teachers may not be able to see, problems which are psychological in nature. Some schools do have the school-based support teams where you find that there's a teacher who is dedicated to talking to these learners. Issues of mental health are addressed. The educational psychologist might be at the school, based at the school, and is able to assess learners. But in some of the schools, you don't really have this capacity, especially in township schools, where you find that there's only one social worker who might be responsible for, 5 schools in a township. In the area. And one school may have a minimum number of 800 learners or even 1,000 learners. So you can imagine the volume of work that the specialist has to go through. So again, our learners find themselves in a difficult position because, this country has got a problem, poverty, unemployment, inequality. We also have learners who come from child-aided families. Learners go through a lot. Whatever happens in townships also find a way to creep into the schools. Drug problems, gangsters in townships. So these learners really need, support, not only academic support, but also, someone who can address their well-being.
The psychosocial.
Psychosocial support is really required. And so by the time they finish, they carry on with this, what they've learned in communities.
And speaking of psychosocial support is one aspect of it, but there is also very much a financial support. Your own background, where you were telling me you started out as a student activist because of issues of exclusion and issues of funding and all of that kind of stuff. Do you think that NSFAS has bridged the gap? Has it got things right? Or is the system broken and we need a new way of looking at how to assist in the financial aspect for students too?
Well, to a large extent, for those students whose applications have been approved, it's something that we can be proud of. We cannot entirely say that government has failed completely. I think that we need to acknowledge that before 1994, the issue of admissions was a very big issue. You'll recall that there were some of the universities which could not accept, especially African students or black students, if I may put it that way. Universities such as your Stellenbosch University, University of Pretoria, the former Rand Afrikaans University, which is now called the University of Johannesburg. If you went into that campus in 1992 or 1991, it was predominantly white. The same goes for UP, Stellenbosch, and so on. And so I think that we must really applaud government in that regard to say, when they said we will open the doors of learning and teaching, in that particular regard, it was done. Again, students who came from disadvantaged communities, most of them were able to enter into that space. Some of us are products of that. I think if it was not for, I think it used to be called TEFSA, Tertiary Education Fund of South Africa, before it was changed into the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. So most of us, when we started, it was still TEFSA. And because of TEFSA, we were able to study with these kids who come from rich families, Tatloof, white children, and so on. Some of them also studied in private institutions, private high schools. So we were together in the same classroom. I think in that particular note, we can safely say government has been able to do something. But of course, it's what had to be done.
Has NSFAS, and we hear lots of things about NSFAS, is there anything that they have got right before we talk about their failings?
Well, they've done a lot right. They are a direct result of 5 million students having graduated from university that never, ever would have had that opportunity. And obviously, as you point out, there are challenges with how it is structured. But we cannot ever forget that fact, that 5 million students have changed their lives, but more importantly, the lives of their families and their communities.
Is there a need for more intervention? In particular, not everybody is going to make it to university. Other people need different pathways. Is there enough being done to offer pathways for students outside of the traditional university route?
I think that enough has not been done. It's not enough. Because if it was enough, then we would not be sitting with such a high rate of unemployment, especially amongst the young people. Remember, if you look at the unemployment statistics, even people with degrees are there. So now, as when we are told, when you buy a newspaper on a Sunday, for instance, and go into career section, you'll find that there are jobs there. Every Sunday, if you buy a paper, there are jobs that are advertised. But the issue of skills mismatch is a problem because someone might have a degree, but their degree does not match the skill that is required in the mainstream economy, and hence they remain unemployed even with that piece of paper. Hence, we've been talking a lot about the 4IR, and I think now we'll be talking about the 5IR now. The jobs that exist today, most of them are becoming obsolete, which means there's a need. I heard Dr. Blake Zimande was saying students should not take those courses that are saturated, which will lead to unemployment. And, there's a debate. Some people were saying, but why are universities offering this subject? So I think that government must really find a way to, deal with this matter in such a way that the future looks even brighter for our students. Otherwise, we'll continue to sit with problems. People will have an honors degree but not be able to make any meaningful contribution or not come up with any skill that is required.
So, the public education system, the public universities, and their undercapacity has obviously created a space that is being filled by private institutions. And these private institutions are growing, but does that then create a structural inequality again, as we see when we talk at basic education level about private schooling versus public schooling? These private institutions that are growing and burgeoning in the country, are they creating a further inequality in education and the quality of education that students get on the other side?
Well, the reality is that, the bulk of the students that go to private institutions are from the missing middle band. So households between 350,000 and 600,000. And there simply is not spaces. Government doesn't have the capital to invest in further infrastructure. So every time a new university comes, it adds only about 2,000 spaces. So we must remember that for first-year students, as they grow and eventually they capacitate. Private providers now make up 30% of the market, and by 2049, they will overtake the public higher education sector.
Sure.
So there is a space for both, but we can never, never negate the important role that public institutions play, because globally, what they are seen as is the research institutions, right? So there's a big argument being made, let universities focus on that research postgraduate space, let the privates come in and help. And one of the things that we're currently engaging with the Department of Higher Education and Training is private providers pay 27% corporate tax. So take that money, put it into bursaries, so that students then that are NSFAS qualifying, for example, can have this extended space, that they, not just the 210 or 230 are fortunate enough to go to public universities and maybe another 150,000 to TVET colleges. Let's look at the system and what is good for our society, not just what the commercial interest is.
And in your experience, if you were to pinpoint one thing and say, if we fixed this component, what do you think is the golden key that would allow the unlocking of the system towards getting it right? What should be the priority area?
Priority, of course, South Africa, if you look at it, over the years, it has always faced three main challenges. And the first one is poverty, followed by unemployment. Unemployment is very rife. People are not working. And of course, inequality in society. The gap between the rich and the poor is widening. And I think that these are some of the challenges. But recently, the challenge of crime as well. Crime is a big problem. It does not affect only communities. It affects even students. It affects learners. Learners are raped. Learners are taken into drugs. Young women are being murdered. The issue of GBV is very rife. And you cannot really single out any, I think all of them that I've mentioned, if they were to be addressed collectively, perhaps as a country would be able to go forward. But of course, the biggest priority also depends on the sector that you find yourself in. But in terms of, academic performance, I would say the biggest issue affecting students, which affected students even back then, is funding. Students need funding in order to carry on. Remember, those who have finished a degree or completed a degree and using NSFAS, if they want to carry on into an honors program, NSFAS can no longer fund them, or even a master's degree. So these kids want to carry on. They want to push and go into postgraduate studies, but they are unable to do so because there is no funding. I think that funding is a big problem. And not only those students. Remember, you also have students who come from middle class or middle income families. Those students, are also struggling financially because their parents are often unable to access loans, and they're excluded also in NSFAS.
Do you think it's possible to offer a world-class education in South Africa and still keep our South Africanness and be able to not dilute the value of what South Africa is about and what South Africans are about? Do you think it's possible to do something like that?
It is highly possible, and that is something that should be done. World-class education is something that we need. We I'll talk about starting from foundation phase. That is where it should start. Recently, a report was issued where it was reported that learners who are in the intermediate phase are unable to read for meaning. And I'm glad that Minister Gwahube has undertaken, to do something about it. But it's not only that. If you listened to the DG speaking during before the results could be issued, he also touched on the issue of maths and science. The results have dropped there. I'm not surprised, because if you go and check the report for TIMSS, the trends in international mathematics and science studies, you will discover that out of 50 countries, I think it was more than 50 countries in this world which participated in that study, South Africa was the second last in as far as the performance of maths and science is concerned. And I think that is a cause for concern, something that really we need to address. I mean, even today, if you walk into any school, be it a private school, or they also call it independent schools. If you go into an independent school or even public school and check the number of learners who take mathematics and science, that number is fewer than the number of learners who take mathematical literacy and other streams. So that actually paints a picture of what the trends in international mathematics and science studies have revealed, because that one is a global study. It was able to detect that South Africa continues to be at the bottom of the list of these other countries. I think Finland was one of the leading countries. We can always find a way to go and learn from them instead of saying not everyone is mathematically inclined. I remember the former Minister of Education, Mayor Njimsa, said that we are not a mathematics country. At some point, that's what she said. And
if you had a magic wand and could change one thing in the system that you believe could unlock its potential, what would that be?
So our biggest problem in the sector is a funding challenge. I would change the way that NSFAS is crafted. I would make tuition fees free for anybody that wants to study in South Africa, public or private institutions. And I would say to students, yes, the tuition is free, but the component for housing, for travel, the living allowance is something that when you earn a particular threshold, so let's say when people start earning 30,000 Rand a month, that you are going to start paying back 1,000 or 2,000 Rand so that we have a sustainable system, not something right now in our university budget, which is in the region of 89 billion, more than 50 billion goes to NSFAS. University budgets are being eroded, and you can see that. Walk onto any university. If you look, you know that we still have the HDIs, the historically disadvantaged universities. There's a grant still called that, right? And the reality is when employers employ, I've been in rooms with HR directors, and you ask them where they're employing from. Still the 5 advantaged institutions, right? Other institutions go and work in government or wherever they can find a job in a small organization. So that systemic prejudice still prevails. And we cannot have an institution that is not getting enough money. There are institutions that have real operations budget constraints, universities that are struggling to pay the salaries every month because of the NSFAS burden. NSFAS, and this is the disingenuous system that we have, NSFAS gets their money at the end of March with a budget vote, with the Appropriations Act. When do universities start? When do university students need to start eating? So our whole system is just geared in a manner that just is illogical. So let's start focusing on the things that are important, that are rational, and let's have a system that is robust and that we can defend and ensure at the back end of this, we don't have students that are struggling to eat and have to read in newspapers about students having to go and work as prostitutes so that they can put food on the table. This is nothing to be proud of. We need to have a system that we're proud of and a system that produces mass graduates for the knowledge economy. Because if we are the leading economy on the African continent, we should behave that way.
So speaking of TVET colleges, there is this kind of status linked to a bachelor degree pass and therefore going to a university, and status that is linked to some universities over other universities. Is it warranted? Should we be kind of looking at TVET colleges as, the poorer cousin or the kids that are not so smart going to or are we unfair in this categorization?
Well, I think the first thing is we're fair and unfair, right? So the fairness is that if you go onto many of our TVET colleges, the infrastructure is deplorable. So we need to say we need to invest, right? We need to get them up to a state like in Germany and Australia, where the first choice is for people to go and do artisan training, for example. I always say to people, do you know what a plumber earns? The average plumber in South Africa earns between 50 and 70,000 rand a month. But we still have this narrative where people would rather be an unemployed lawyer than an employed plumber. So we also need to do work. But the other thing is we are a culture and a society that looks at job placements, right? So if you look at what TVET colleges' job placements are, I spoke about the numbers 10 to 12% for a university degree. For TVET college students, it's 48%. Now, if you're a parent, what are you going to be fighting for? For your child to have the best possible opportunity in life. So if you know my child is going to go to a TVET college and there's still a almost 50% chance they're not going to be employed, it's going to be a problem. And that's why the artisan skills, where people can start their own organizations, their own businesses. In the UAE, all of our artisans are leaving our countries in drove, right? The boilermakers, the fitters and turners, the motor mechanics, they are in such global demand. And we need to invest in that sector and change the narrative so that we then start investing in that sector.
If you were to give a matriculant, somebody who's just received their results, one piece of advice about the chances they have out there going into tertiary and what they should be looking out for, what would that be?
Well, I think that matriculants should look out for, subjects or courses that are going to help them in the future. It cannot be correct that we are all going to go into streams that are traditionally, filled. I don't really want to mention certain degrees, but, people just have to find skills that are going to assist them. Yes, someone was saying those who come from rich families, yes, some of these courses you can take for the sake of gathering knowledge and so on. But, even President Thabo Mbeki was talking about it, to say if we are all going to study sociology at university, then, really how...
There's no balance.
Yes, because if we are many there in that faculty or in that particular department, and I'm not undermining the course itself. It's a very good course. It's a course that, but if all of us are just doing sociology and this stream of STEM is neglected, there are problems that need to be solved. We need engineers as well. This country has been outsourcing some of these programs. It can no longer be correct that government must rely on consultants, every time, whilst we've got a workforce. Our children must identify all of those courses that will be in line with what the 4IR demand.
The most important thing is I always say to people, so students that finish grade 12 now have this choice in front of them. Either they're going to try and find a job and it will be a menial job. I mean, if you have a grade 12, we understand that it will be a cashier or it will be a something in that line. The next choice is that we colloquially refer to as the gap year, which to me, in my life, I refer to as the nonsense year. But if you are going to take that year to decide what it is that you're going to do, start planning your future. So there are these 3 free, wonderful courses through ADvTECH, edX, Coursera, from the top universities in the world. And this is also great for people that are working upskilling. 6-week free courses on every imaginable thing in the world. So whether it's bioscience, whether it's coding, whether it's learning a language, whatever it is that you're interested in, project management, these free courses that you do, keep your mind active and use this year to decide what your destiny is going to be. Take part-time jobs, whether it is babysitting, whether it is running errands for people. Start being independent, because your dependency now for 12 years was on your parents, or 13 years if you were fortunate to have an ECD program. But now you need to start taking accountability for your own life. If you don't get into university and your parents can't afford it, there are other options. Go to SETAs. There are SETAs in every single province. Enroll for a learnership. Look for internship opportunities. But don't be despondent. Some people have to send out their CVs literally 600 times before they get an opportunity. So be mindful of that, right? You have to be tenacious to craft your life. Nobody's coming to save you. You have to put that effort in to make sure that you are successful.